The Judith Regan Show, Sirius XM Stars.
I want a new drug, one that won't make me sick, one that won't make me crash my car and make me feel 3 feet thick. I want a new drug.
This is Judith Regan. I don't want a new drug. I'm back. Mark
Life is a
Rossini's
drug.
in studio with us.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Mark.
Good to be here.
And Dr. Henry Paul joins us. He is the author of When Kids Need Meds, Everything a Parent Needs to Know About Psychiatric Medication and Youngsters, which is available wherever books are sold. You can also visit his website at henrypaulmd.com. He also is the author of other books, When Kids Are Mad, Not Bad, Is My Child Okay, Is My Teenager Okay, and When Kids Need Meds. He is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. He's acted as president of the American Institute for Psychoanalysis and the executive director of the Karen Horney Clinic in New York. And I could go on and on, but I won't. I want to welcome Dr. Henry Paul. Welcome.
Hi. Thanks for the big intro.
Well, there you go. So I'm very interested in this subject and have been reading of late. There was recently a piece in the New York Times where one psychiatrist down south was talking about, we've decided as a society that it's too expensive to modify the kid's environment, so we have to modify the kid. And we're now prescribing prescription pills like Adderall to low-income kids, even if they don't need the drugs to function, because it's just the fastest way to get them to do well in school temporarily. Now, there's been lots and lots written about the drugging of children, the use of prescription drugs, the misuse of prescription drugs. And I thought maybe you could just shed some light on it, get us through it. I want to seek some understanding about it because obviously it's not a black and white situation. What do you say to that psychiatrist who said that we've decided as a society that it's too expensive to modify the kid's environment, so we modify the kid?
Well, it's kind of a bizarre thing. I read the article. It was in the front page of the New York Times,
Mm-hmm.
as many psychiatric medication articles are, because it's a subject that ignites all sorts of raw emotion in people.
Right.
So it's a very common thing to talk about this. And first thing, he's kind of silly to admit publicly that he commits a form of practice that is very, very unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, that's for sure.
To give kids prescription medication who have not been diagnosed appropriately borders on malpractice.
I don't think it borders. I think it is. I mean, I really do think it's an outrage.
Right. So I don't even know what he's talking about, except it got front page, headlines. But, I must say the whole subject of psychiatric medication in children, if it brings out Internet articles and Internet pieces and Internet statements that are so fallacious that if you type in any child psychiatric medication, you'll probably find thousands of articles about deaths that never occurred, side reactions that don't occur, horrible mythical concepts that really strike me as really kind of sad for parents who really want information, truthful information about these medications.
Okay.
So for example, giving Ritalin to kids not only was bad behavior on his part if he does it the way he says he does, but generally you'll find that there's a terror about Ritalin. There's even people who say ADHD doesn't exist. Every kid's a little inattentive, and every kid's a little distractible and hyperactive. And that's true. Most kids go through those phases. But if you've been a parent of a kid with ADHD or you've had ADHD, you know that diagnosis really does exist. And God help you if you've unfortunately had the situation that you have it or you have a kid with it. But and when you take these medications after being prescribed by someone who knows the field, and you see the tremendous improvement in so many aspects of the child, never medication alone, by the way, but medication as an adjunct to all the other things the kids need, you say, thank God these medications exist. And not only that, you say to yourself, boy, I don't see any side effects for the most part. Very rare that any serious side effect ever occurred. No one's ever died from a psychotropic medication. No child has ever died from one if it's prescribed correctly. I can't tell you that it's always prescribed correctly. And I can't tell you that people don't overdose on things. But
Right.
Correct prescription of child psychotropic medication has never caused, it's maybe extremely rare instances does it cause major side reactions.
Okay, but then, go ahead, finish.
So there's a lot of hysteria out there.
Right.
And when I wrote this book, which is, by the way, a reassuring book for parents, it's not a book that pushes pills because I'm not a pill pusher. I provide general psychiatric services, including medication. It was to really reassure parents, here's the facts, and you don't have to be so terrified. But all parents are terrified. If you're told your kid has a psychiatric disorder, it's scary. And to be told that you need chemicals that we don't quite know exactly how they work,
Is scary.
That's even scarier.
Right.
And then you want to know, well, if there are no short-term side effects, what is it going to do to my kid's brain later? That's scary.
Okay, and here's the other scary thing. When doctors like the one who was quoted in the New York Times says, well, instead of engineering the kid's environment, we engineer the kid. Okay.
That's what are we talking? The guy should not be the subject of conversation.
Okay,
because
but
it's really not the usual child and adolescent psychiatrist statements. But let me just say something else.
okay.
There are only 6,000 or 7,000 child psychiatrists in the country. That's very, very few, maybe 100 a state, a little bit more. So most child psychotropic medication is given by non-psychiatrists.
Right.
And that's scary.
Right.
You hope that the pediatrician has done some reading, maybe taken some courses on it, but there is a shortage of people who really know how to use the medication correctly.
All right.
So that's a big problem.
Well, of course.
But when used correctly, I mean, it just is a tremendous help. It saves lives. It saves kids from being abused. It saves kids from being thrown out of schools. By the way, ADHD correctly treated decreases substance abuse in these kids when they become teenagers. It keeps them on track in school. So,
all right. So the question then really becomes, how do we determine how these medications are used correctly, and how do we get a proper diagnosis? Because I certainly have seen in my own life, in my own family, lots and lots of what one would describe as ADHD if one wasn't properly educated, children who have suffered trauma and then develop symptoms that would definitely mimic ADHD, right,
Yes.
because of traumatic experiences that they've had. And it takes time to sort through those things. It takes money to sort through those things, with proper psychiatric care.
right. So there's a way to do it like any other area of medicine.
Okay.
You go to a diagnostician who's experienced, and he does a history, which can take 2 sessions with parents to really know what the kid's about, a pediatric history, a physical history, and a mental behavioral history. Then you interview the child appropriately, whichever way you have to interview the child. It's usually a verbal discussion. And then you come up with a diagnosis. It's not magic. It's not make-believe. The difference between psychiatry and other professions is, if you break your leg and you have an X-ray taken, the radiologist is going to say, look, here's the break. Your tibia is broken. In psychiatry, it's a little weirder because there aren't anatomical findings.
Right.
So it becomes like a little spooky to people. What's the guy talking
Well,
about?
and it is a little guesswork, isn't it?
No, there's no guesswork.
Well, there is guesswork because you said that we don't know the effect that these drugs have.
Wait. There's no guesswork with diagnosis.
Okay.
You can make a diagnosis. You read the diagnostic manuals. You treat thousands of kids. You know how to make a diagnosis. You also know how to use the proper medications. Now, if you ask me, how specifically does the Ritalin work? Do we know exactly which molecule? We don't know the answers, as we don't for many drugs in medicine, by the way.
Right. No, I know that. Yes, I know that's
So
true.
a lot of medicine has mystery in it, but that's not to say, well, don't give it, because if you give kids Ritalin, I'm just taking Ritalin, by the way, there are 89 psychotropic medications,
Yes.
but you take Ritalin, 65, 70% of the kids who have bona fide diagnosed ADHD will get better.
Okay, but I would like to offer the following anecdote about my own life. My son was thrown out of several schools because I wouldn't put him on Ritalin. And they were, the schools, not the doctors, the schools were insisting I put him on Ritalin.
Oh, of course.
Okay, he's now 31 years old. I believe that there are non-pharmaceutical interventions and other ways to deal with children who won't sit still, okay? My son was really not a kid who wanted to sit in his chair. So the schools are like, you need to put him on Ritalin.
Well,
I'm like, no, you need to have an athletic program so he can run around because he was a super athlete, right?
What you're presenting is an extremely common story, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And, I've heard it 100 times this week. So, I'm
Okay,
exaggerating,
all right.
obviously.
Okay.
But here's the story, not knowing your son. If your son had ADHD diagnosed correctly, the best treatment would have been what we call a multimodal approach, a little school help, maybe a little therapeutic help, and a little medication help. And probably he would have done very well. Now, people say, well, I don't want to give the Ritalin. They have 1,000 reasons they don't want to give it. I have no fight with anybody. They don't want to give it. But there hasn't been anything shown to be as effective for the treatment at the moment of symptoms of ADHD than drugs like Ritalin. Not just Ritalin, of course.
Okay,
Ritalin.
but
So it just has not been shown. So people say, well, diet helps. Well, it's not been shown. exercise helps. It's not been shown. So I understand.
Why hasn't it been shown?
combination?
Have the studies been done?
The studies have been done multiple times and repetitively. The Feingold diet, for example, where you take the additives out. Remember that one?
Yep.
Never been shown.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something that worked with my son. Right.
Well, again, remember, we don't know what your son has.
We don't, but we had a lot of people saying, "Oh, he has ADHD," blah blah blah.
Well,
And some of the
I don't know
doctors,
that.
and he didn't go to a child psychiatrist. He went to a psychologist. So,
Well, that's okay.
all right, yeah, that's okay. And everyone had an opinion, but I was his mother, and I observed his behavior more closely than most. He did. The diet did affect him a little bit because he was, the sugar would really send him. The exercise absolutely affected him because he took up swimming and would swim, hours a day. That absolutely calmed him down. And the third thing that really helped him was when he learned how to meditate.
Right.
When he learned how to meditate, it changed his life.
Well,
That's what worked for him.
How old was he then?
He was like 11.
Well, no
10,
one
11.
told you probably the truth that no one tells, which is that most child psychiatric syndromes get better right before puberty and through puberty for unknown reasons.
Okay.
So most mothers who call me panicking that the school has told her for the third time that the kid has to now leave this private school,
Yeah.
I probably tell them in the first conversation, well, don't worry, whatever he has probably is going to get better
Okay.
when he goes through puberty.
All right, but here's the thing. I did not give him Ritalin. He did not go on any drugs.
Right.
All right. He did whatever he did, and he turned out magnificently. And he ended up
That's
at
a terrific story.
MIT, blah blah
But
blah.
the story doesn't explain what we're talking about.
Okay.
It explains your son, and thank God everything turned out nice.
Okay.
But for that one story, I can give you 50 stories of very sick and impaired children who need this medication
Right.
for all sorts of reasons: parental problems, poor people who don't have the facilities necessary or the attention, whatever it is, who without the medication are going to fail.
What about Adderall?
Adderall is just another one of these stimulant medications. Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, Dexedrine, dextroamphetamine, Vyvanse, they're all the same kind of drug. They're stimulants which paradoxically calm down kids with ADHD. And by the way, one of the ways to make the diagnosis when you're not sure, you give the mother the pill. She said, come back tomorrow, but give the kid the pill 45 minutes before you come. And sometimes you see a different child. And that's what we used to call diagnosis by therapeusis. In other words, give a therapeutic agent and make the diagnosis because you'll see how it calms the kid down. If the kid just has anxiety, it'll usually make them worse. But when they have ADHD, the paradoxical effect of it is to calm the child down, and many of the very subtle signs of ADHD are gone during the time that's in his blood.
Right. We're speaking with Dr. Henry Paul, who is the author of When Kids Need Meds, Everything a Parent Needs to Know About Psychiatric Medication in Youngsters. I want to talk for a minute about this 17-year-old Jake Evans, who killed his mother and his sister. And
yes.
He
Right.
called 911 to turn himself in, and we have do we have the tape, Joe? We have a tape of him. You can hear his voice.
Parker County 911, where is your emergency?
My house,
What's the address?
152 River Creek Lane.
Okay, what's the emergency?
I just killed my mom and my sister.
What?
I just killed my mom and my sister.
You just killed your mother and your sister? How did you do that?
I shot him with a .22 revolver.
And what is your name?
Jake Evans.
Okay, is there any reason that you were so angry at your mother and your sister?
It's weird. I wasn't even really angry with them. It just kind of happened. I've been kind of planning on killing for a while now.
The two of them, or just anybody?
Pretty much anybody.
Why?
I don't know. I don't really like people's kind of attitude.
Right.
It's just my family, I don't know, they're just kind of really, I guess this is really selfish to say, but to me, I felt like they were just suffocating me in a way. I don't know.
There you go. Is that it? Yeah.
Jeez.
So, I don't know if you've heard the whole tape, Dr. Paul.
No, I read the story, and it's if you don't hear it, it's almost unbelievable to hear that.
Well, he goes on like that, and
Right.
then he talks. Do you have any more of it, Joe? Because
this
this
is really gonna mess me up for this, in the future. See, my sister, I tell my sister that my mom needed her.
Mhm.
She was in her room, and she came out of her room, and I shot her, and she rolled down the stairs, and I shot her again, and then I went down and I shot my mom about maybe 3 or 4 times, but I'll never forget this.
Okay, that's fine.
My sister, she came down the stairs and she was screaming, and I was telling her that I'm sorry, but to just hold still.
Mhm.
That, I was just gonna make it go away, but she just kept on freaking out. But finally she fell down and I shot her in the head about probably 3 times.
So, what's your take on this guy? I mean, he's 17 years old.
So he's 17, and I think from what I remember reading in the articles that there wasn't much psychiatric history known to anybody.
No.
But, when you hear these stories, these kids usually fall under especially when they're a little younger, they fall into I think a syndrome called the callous unemotional child.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's how it was written up, because here he's telling of what we would call heinous events, and said, not completely, but said in almost a detached and dissociated way. He's reporting 2 murders that happened to happen by his hand, and he's not reporting it in any way that you would think was terribly emotional, except he seemed a little tearful, a little remorseful. But these are the kids who are described as having attachment disorders. In other words, these kids from early ages on, and I think if we did a good history with the teachers who know him and other family members, you'll find that this kid was not attached with empathy to other human beings. He did not feel what other people feel, although there's some evidence that he did to some degree.
Right.
So that other human beings' feelings and feeling states are not appreciated by him. These are kids who often end up being sociopaths later on.
Mm-hmm.
When you see the Dahmers who are interviewed on MSNBC, sometimes they go into the jails on death row, and they describe the killings or the rapes or whatever they've done in an almost emotionless, flat, affective way.
Right.
And this is what we're hearing. And this is usually thought to be due to attachment disorders that happen very early in life, usually within the first year. For some reason, the major task of the first year of life is to attach to your mother or mother surrogate. And kids who don't attach end up having behaviors that are obscenely almost unhuman.
Right.
And
we were talking about this in the episode.
This is an example. And years ago, I remember we did a show many years ago on Donahue. Do you remember that?
Of course. I was on Donahue, believe it or not.
Well, I didn't see you that day. But anyway, I was on with a bunch of kids like this, and they had come out with a new therapy called holding therapy.
Right.
Because they felt these kids and that they needed to be held as older children already. So if you held them long enough and made them scream enough, they would find some human bond or something. It's a little kooky, but these have been enigmas to American psychiatry because there's almost no treatment. I mean, they recommend all different sorts of treatment, social milieu therapy, group therapy, interactive feeling therapy. But the truth is most of these kids, we don't know how to treat. The medication doesn't really help because they're not terribly symptomatic. This kid, the one particularly on the phone tonight, sounded a little bit depressed, maybe a little psychotic, I'm not sure, although there wasn't enough evidence for any of this. He sounded maybe, believe it or not, like a slightly better prognosis than the usual kid who you'll get on these tapes and committing these acts.
Right.
But certainly not a good prognosis.
He did say, this is going to sound selfish and this is going to mess me up, that he had to, his sister was screaming and he had to put her out of her misery.
That sounded more like a narcissistic word.
Totally.
About what's going to happen to me. It's kind of, there wasn't much of a...
And nothing about them.
Right. It's kind of a self-referential comment we make. But his voice was a little shaky. I'm searching for a little something positive in the whole thing, but I'm really searching somewhere I shouldn't.
And there's no treatment.
The treatments don't help. He has to be confined probably the rest of his life.
Right. Now, what about James Egan Holmes, the
Aurora, Colorado.
Aurora, Colorado guy who went into the movie theater and...
Well, he's first thing, we don't know much about him because we haven't read the reports of what he was being treated for, and we don't really have a report from a psychiatrist about anything about him. But he fit the mold, it seems, of a mass murderer who's usually a isolated, lonely, decompensating person who's had some type of event happen to him, maybe failure in school. We don't know, but we're kind of putting the story together, who then goes out and commits a mass murder. What's different about him is that the mass murderers usually have revenge or something particularly vindictive towards someone or something. We don't have that with him yet. Maybe he was angry at the school. I mean, we don't know. But he's claiming an insanity defense in Colorado, from what I understand. In Colorado, it's the job of the prosecutor to prove sanity, not for the defendant to prove insanity.
Yeah.
And he probably will be sane. I mean, it's going to be a tough one because this guy had the 3 Ps, I think they call it. He did planning and practice and preparing.
Right.
So it looked like, if insanity is not because of mental disease, not being able to appreciate the wrongness of your act, I think he did appreciate it. So I'm not sure he's going to get this insanity defense.
Right.
But it's a little harder in Colorado because the burden of proof is on the prosecution.
Right.
But so and proving insanity or not, it'll just be the difference in the penalty. If he's sane, he's going to get a death penalty probably, and if he's insane, he'll have life in prison.
Right.
But psychiatrically speaking, we just don't know enough.
Right. Well, I don't know if the psychiatric records are going to be. I think there was a decision today. I don't know what it was, but there's something is going to come out. I don't know if the psychiatric records are probably not going to come out though, unless they're to his benefit. Maybe they will come out.
That's right. Well, I think they might be able to subpoena those records.
Yeah.
Because he saw some people at school, and that committee was involved.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Right. But aren't those private?
Well, his psychiatric records might be private, but I'm not sure that the school committee stuff is
Right,
private.
and the threats. All right. We are out of time.
I feel worse for the psychiatrist, by the way, Dr. Fenton, I think her name is.
Yeah, that's not going to be fun.
Well, she has to live with this the rest of her life, and it's terrible because she did everything that she was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yet it was kind of dropped, and these things are easily dropped unconsciously because they're really painful things to deal with.
I know. All right. Dr. Henry Paul, author of When Kids Need Meds, Everything a Parent Needs to Know About Psychiatric Medication in Youngsters, henrypaulmd.com, and many other books. Thank you so much for being here.
Much.
Thank you. This is Judith Regan, and when we come back, the author of The End of Your Life Book Club, Will Schwalb. What a beautiful book this is.
Really?
Oh,
I gotta
my
read
God.
it. Okay.
Stunning, stunning, stunning. Don't go away.